The same summer that I met Drew, I discovered the pendant. After leaving a job I detested and a life that felt like someone else's Pinterest board, I was 23 years old and strolling barefoot across a beach in Port Harbor. It was a teardrop-shaped piece of smooth sea glass, of a foggy green hue that the water had spat forth. I wore it around my neck like armor, looping it through a leather string. I was still wearing it the night he told me he needed space 20 years later. It took place at a restaurant called Rowley's, which served expensive fish and cotton napkins. Our favorite spot for promotions, anniversaries, and nights when we acted like we were still in love. Drew remarked, "I need space in between mouthfuls of grilled fish." He didn't give me a glance. He merely agitated his water while seeing the condensation trickle down the edge as if it held a more significant message. 3 words. That's all. I feel like I'm just furniture in a room that has become too full for him to breathe. No, I'm unhappy. No, we need to talk. I refrained from arguing. I refrained from crying. I simply nodded while keeping my fingertips cool against my collarbone beneath the sea glass pendant. Dessert was brought by the waitress. I didn't touch it. He didn't go out with me. He remained most likely looking at his phone or hers. Perhaps I'm saying this out of sequence, though. The true tale did not start at Rowley's. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the victory over it, according to a faded poster that was displayed in a small examination room with beige walls. 3 weeks prior, Dr. Ferris had added softly, Stage 2, cancer of the breast. However we discovered it early, I recall nodding, arranging for surgery. Not because I was brave, but because I had no idea what else to do. I asked if I could continue working while under radiation. I was 46. In our repurposed garage, I operated a modest but reliable design firm. Drew had just become a partner at his architectural practice. Caleb, our son, had recently left for college. It was anticipated that we would be starting our second act. Rather, my body had made the decision to fight itself. On the way home, I prepared how I would tell Drew, calmly, logically, in the manner he preferred. No drama, no tears. At a red light, I even rehearsed it out loud. However, the home was dark when I entered via the front entrance. My phone rang with a text. "I'm working late. Avoid waiting up that week for the 3rd time." We erected the butcher block countertop ourselves the summer after Caleb was born, and I was sitting by myself in our kitchen, running my fingers over its grooves. I couldn't recall the last time Drew had touched me without making me wince that night, or spent more than 5 seconds looking me in the eye. I was too exhausted to weep, too afraid to yell. Rather, I scheduled my first oncology consultation by myself and started telling falsehoods to everyone. I would say, "Oh, Drew is just really busy at work. When the time is appropriate, we will inform Caleb." But I knew in my heart, I was aware of how to predict impending storms. Before you can feel the wind, you can smell it. I started by finding the receipts for restaurants we had never eaten at, and jewelry stores I had never visited. His voice was low as he made late-night phone calls in the garage. I didn't recognize the cologne. The updated workout routine, I would never wear the coral lip gloss on his collar. I had hope, nevertheless. Then Drew arrived home early one Friday. With a rather official tone, he stated, "I made reservations for Sunday." We must speak. My chest constricted. Perhaps I thought. Perhaps he has now realized how far we have strayed. Perhaps he had been reminded of what was important by this diagnosis and the threat that hung over me. It took me 2 hours to prepare. That meal opted for a black garment that concealed my weight loss. My hair was curled. I even found the jewelry he gave me for our 5th wedding anniversary. Before I left, I murmured to myself, "He'll remember." As I looked in the mirror, he didn't. He made stilted small talk while seated across from me at Rowley's before dropping it like a news release. "I require room. This is no longer effective." I was going to speak to inform him of the cancer, about my level of fear. However, he interrupted me as if he were running late for a meeting. "I've evolved." He went on, "You've changed," as though that clarified everything. "We both have a right to happiness." 20 years suddenly turned into a logistical problem. I said, "There's someone else." There was no question. His gaze wavered. "Sienna is her name. She works at the office." It sort of just occurred. It did, of course. I grounded myself by reaching up and touching the sea glass pendant with my thumb. I'd like a divorce, Drew declared. A business card was then slid over the table. My attorney will contact you. I gazed intently at the card. The edges were jagged, a silver embossed name. I was being pushed out of our son's life like a business deal by the same hands that had previously held mine at his first steps. Is that all? Quietly, I inquired. He paused. I guess it is. I didn't lose it. I didn't plead. I simply got up, left my dessert unfinished, and turned to leave, leaving the eatery. From his life. The cancer could wait to survive. Initially, I went through a divorce. It took me 3 days to open the manila packet. Silent, heavy, and indisputable, it rested on the kitchen counter like a burial urn. My gut twisted each time I passed it. It was only paper, I reminded myself, legalese, figures, chilly calculations. But as we both know, divorce is more than just a statistic. It's a story. Erasure is what it is. I prepared tea on the 4th day, sat down and used the edge of a butter knife to cut it open. 27 pages of effective heartbreak are contained within. The home is for sale. Caleb's fund for college divided already. I have 90 days to leave my studio, which is the garage where I painted and worked for years. Even the 4,750 line item for wedding jewelry gifted to spouse was included. Fortunately, the sea glass pendant was not included in the list. I ought to have contacted a lawyer. I ought to have fought. However, I didn't. I put my signature on it. Silently, with caution. Like someone who has never been trained to use a sword. I gave my sister Lila a call that evening. You won't argue against it. Her voice cracked as she asked, legal fees should be used to bury him. I said, I'm exhausted. And in 2 weeks, I have radiotherapy. This would consume any last vigor I possess. She didn't say anything for a while. What if you're not giving up? She inquired. What if the board is being set by you? I wasn't sure what she meant at first. However, I would, Ruth Calder, an elderly woman with a voice like gravel and sunlight, called me 2 weeks later. She identified herself as Drew's father, Walter Calder's estate attorney. I assume the divorce papers have been delivered to you. She inquired. Yes. I tensed and said, why? Due to the fact that Walter left something behind, and it has a bigger impact on you than you may imagine. In downtown Fairfield, Ruth's office was housed in a historic colonial structure. Her short gray curls were pushed back behind her ears when she greeted me at the door, wearing a wire-rimmed pair of glasses and a navy wool jacket. She gestured me to a chair and continued, I represented Walter for more than 30 years. He wasn't ostentatious, he was purposeful, though 5 years ago he inserted a very specific clause into his amended will. She slid a sheet of paper in my direction. It wasn't long. Only 3 paragraphs. However, it caused a tectonic upheaval beneath my feet. My son Andrew Calder will lose all inheritance rights and access to family trust funds if he files for divorce from his wife, Elena Ward Calder, without a valid reason such as adultery, fraud, or abuse. Instead, all assets will be given to Elena's preferred charity, or if she declines, to the Red Cliffs Community Endowment. I went back and read it. But then again, did he never read the will? I inquired. Ruth grinned. He was too preoccupied with applauding himself and constructing buildings. Without a single question, Drew simply signed the inheritance acceptance packet after Walter passed away. I reclined. My palms trembled, but it was from something colder than adrenaline. Recognizing, I muttered, I don't want the money. I don't wish to ruin him, Ruth remarked. That clause doesn't give you wealth. You gain weight from it, you mattered, it says. That someone saw what you provided and documented the protection. Even if it wasn't him, I gripped my pendant tightly. Suddenly, it felt heavier and warmer. I don't intend to interrupt their engagement celebration. I stated. Ruth's eyes glistened as she answered, No. You'll allow it to occur. You will then go and bring him the letter he didn't read. For the next 2 weeks, I alternated between preparations in silence and radiation treatments. I went back to sleep eating once more. Even though I was not wearing a scarf, my hair began to thin at the edges. Every day I wore my sea glass pendant, place it like a compass needle right above my collarbone. In addition, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I paid Caleb a visit on campus. He showed up without warning with that stupid soccer hoodie he left in the laundry and lunch. He gave me the strongest hug he had given me in months. "Are you all right, Mom?" Mid-bite, he inquired. I replied, "I will be, I swear." Ruth mailed Drew's firm the official estate notification the day before the party, with the intention of having it arrive the following morning. As she slipped the certified envelope inside her leather briefcase, she remarked, "Time is everything." I was sorting through gowns that didn't feel like me that evening while I stood in front of my closet. Then I saw it, a silk-wrapped dress in a rich green color that I hadn't worn in years. The sea glass is the same tint I put it on. It was appropriate. Not quite as tight as it once was. A bit older. But I muttered, "You survived." As I glanced in the mirror, I traveled north to the Lake Wind estate, Drew's favorite Berkshire's property on the morning of the celebration. 10 years ago, when it was merely a dilapidated cottage and we still believed in shared dreams. I had accompanied him on a scout of the area. It was immaculate now, overly planned. Too pale. It's too staged. Like a person attempting to win over strangers rather than host relatives, I stopped right in front of the main gate. Inhaled deeply, I reminded myself, "You're not here to burn bridges. You're here to prove to them who constructed them." After that, I straightened my pendant, got out of the automobile, and entered the lion's den. Luxury automobiles and white garden lamps lined the driveway, which curved like a question mark. The trees gave a courteous rustle. The wind even had a manicured feel. I parked slightly out of sight and sat motionless for a while, observing the dashboard's shifting shadows. I had steady hands, I didn't have a pulse. However, I wasn't here to cause a stir, I had come to deliver the truth. Notarized, sealed, and in an envelope so plain, it would have passed for a birthday card. Wearing the green silk dress, I went out. As I walked, the sea glass pendant caught the sunlight, creating a subtle sheen on the pebbles. At first, no one paid me any attention. I passed circular linen-wrapped tables, towering glass vases filled with cauliflowers and white tents. Near the lake's edge, a string quartet performed a gentle classical tune. Trays of lobster sliders and sparkling wine were passed by servers. Everyone looked wealthy and a little bored at the festivities, until people notice you. The director of public relations for Drew's company, Margot Hensley, gave the first gasp. Her gaze expanded. Then, as if she had seen a ghost, her hand went to her lips. A few people looked around, and more conversations turned to whispers. I continued. I didn't elaborate. As I approached the dock, I saw Drew standing there, his arm around Sienna's waist. He was wearing a pale gray suit, and as he saw me, his arrogant smirk fell away. Seconds before he did, Sienna noticed me. Her smile wavered. Her posture stiffened as she whispered something. Drew pivoted. The entire world stopped. "Elena." He shouted too loudly, as though he could control the tone and hence the story. "This is surprising. Hello, Drew," I said in a level and composed tone. "Congratulations, Sienna." I extended the envelope, a little silent movement similar to giving someone a birthday card. But his fingers hesitated under its weight. "What is this?" he asked, refusing to accept it. I said, "A copy of something you ought to have read 5 years ago. Your dad's will." The quintet did, in fact, cease playing at this point. Sienna scowled. "I don't get it. I told them, you don't have to." "He does." I carefully unfurled the document after opening the envelope. In the sunshine, the official seal glistened a little. It stipulates that Drew Calder will lose all inheritance rights, including access to family trust funds, the Lakewind estate, and holdings in the Calder Legacy Foundation, if he files for divorce from me without providing a valid reason. Ripples of gasps. Sienna's voice rose as she blinked. "This isn't true. You're playing a bluff." I looked over at her. "It's true. It was Ruth Calder who filed it." Notarized, captured, Drew took a step back. "You're attempting to spoil this occasion, out of spite." "No," I replied, "on principle." He glanced around and noticed that the visitors were observing and chatting. He made an effort to get better. "This is confidential. This wasn't necessary for you to do here." To be honest, I answered, "I didn't want to." However you choose to celebrate your future in a lie-based environment, and legally, your future is based on mine. Sienna grabbed the will out of his grasp. She read more quickly than I anticipated, and by the second paragraph, her hands were shaking. She yelled, "Tell me this isn't binding," Drew whispered. "She's bluffing," but his voice broke. A deep voice behind me whispered, "She's not." I pivoted. Ruth Calder, with her own little envelope in hand, stood at the edge of the lawn. She didn't grin, she didn't flinch. The firm and the Calder Foundation received an official notification this morning. She stated, "Your accounts will be frozen by tomorrow. The estate will start the transfer process, including this house." "Wait!" Sienna exclaimed. "This is my life now." "You said you would." "I made a lot of promises," Drew said feebly. Sienna gave him a slap at that point. At last the afternoon's manufactured elegance was broken by a harsh reverberating sound. Then she turned to leave. Quick, no footwear, no handbag, just rage. Some of the visitors made an effort to act as though nothing had occurred. Others remained stunned. "Calder's done," one man murmured, while another replied, "Checkmate." Drew gazed at me, pale, emptied out. "This was something you planned." I gave a head shake. "No, your dad did. You never read the letter I just delivered." Without saying another thing, I walked away, with my heels crunching on dirt and the wind slightly raising the hem of my dress. I made my way back to my car. I was steadied by the pendant that swayed on my skin at my neck. The string quartet behind me didn't start up again. There was no more music at the gathering. I climbed into the car and drove off. I refrained from crying. I didn't chuckle. No longer someone rejected. I simply turned up the radio and let the sun shine on my face as I merged onto the highway. But someone who had been spotted at last. After the party, I didn't hear from Drew for 3 days. Not an SMS message. No call. Just silence, the kind of silence that begs for time rather than forgiveness. My phone rang on the 4th day. Called or Drew. I debated while gazing at the television. I might leave it on voicemail. The number could be blocked by me. But an answer was spoken from somewhere inside me, something steady and final. "So, I did. Elena," he whispered in a strange, raspy voice. "We must speak. I'm paying attention. Not on the phone. Please in person." The following night we got together at a peaceful cafe on the outskirts of town. I got there first, picking a booth in a corner with lots of windows and enough room between tables so that no one could try to listen in. Covertly, Drew arrived late, more slowly, thinner, as if the reality had finally started to weigh heavily on his shoulders. He gave me the kind of look someone might give a closed door, for which they formerly had a key. He sat across from me and clasped his hands over a coffee cup that he hardly touched, saying, "Thanks for coming." "I nearly didn't," I answered, "but I thought you should have one conversation that wasn't at a cocktail party." I didn't soften it when he flinched at that. He started by saying, "I'm not here to grovel." "Well," I replied, "because I don't need that." He breathed out, slowly. Sienna departed. The company's distance. Everything was confirmed by my dad's attorney. I was no longer trusted. The home. The contributions. "It's all falling apart," I remarked. "You're not here to list consequences. You haven't asked for something, which is why you're here." He scowled. "What?" "The reason I kept the clause from you, why I didn't say anything." He didn't answer. So I told him. 3 weeks prior to your divorce request, I received a cancer diagnosis. Phase 2 breast. His face went cold. I said, "On the evening of that dinner, I intended to tell you. Perhaps it would awaken us both," I reasoned. "Remember that there was still something left. Elena," I went on, "I didn't get the chance. Because you informed me you needed space before I could say anything else, that you had already located a flat, that another person was present." He appeared devastated. "I didn't know." "I understand," I replied. "That was the most painful thing. You were unaware that I was ill. You didn't inquire. Why I was losing weight was not a mystery to you. Why was I unable to sleep? The reason I flinched when I hoisted the shopping bags, I thought." He said, pausing to swallow. "I believed you were retreating?" "No," I answered in a composed tone. "I was vanishing, and you didn't stay long enough to notice it." His gaze was fixed on his coffee. I wasn't prepared to feel insignificant. I wasn't prepared to play the bad guy. Then perhaps you ought to have read the fine print. I remarked. He refrained from crying. Drew Calder is a dry-eyed person, but he felt as though a tight knot was loosening one painful thread at a time. I could have been destroyed by you. I didn't, I answered. I let your father's words speak for themselves. Slowly he nodded. I intend to relocate to Providence, smaller company, smaller apartment. A smaller life, I inquired. Perhaps I should have shrunk a little to reintegrate into something actual. We sat silently for a long time. You wore that dress, but why? He asked abruptly. At the gathering, I put my hand on the pendant on my neck. Because this and it matched. He appeared perplexed. I answered, "This is sea glass." Over time, the tide smoothed the broken glass. The same colored outfit served as a reminder rather than a weapon. You attempted to discard me, and I allowed the tide to carry me till I returned more lucid, sharp, and unavoidable. He didn't answer. It dawned on me then that I didn't require his help. He didn't follow me when I got up to go. All he said was, "I apologize for everything." "I understand," I replied. "However, it isn't resolved by that. It simply lends it a human touch." Then I stepped off the curb into the chilly early spring air. My coat's green silk catching the breeze, I refrained from crying. I stopped bleeding because I was done, not because I was strong. That year, spring arrived slowly in Port Harbor. Soft, unyielding indicators, rather than pyrotechnics or vibrant hues, were used, crocuses coming up through unyielding soil, wind chimes. I had forgotten I owned ringing over the porch, and my reflection in the mirror, which was no longer hollow but rather more mine. It had been 6 months since the Lakewind celebration, 3 since Drew left the company. 1 since Ruth had given me the last update. The estate had been given to a women's shelter that Walter Calder had covertly funded for years, and the family trust had now been formally transferred. Drew never disputed it, never made a public statement. He just retreated into whatever life he was constructing next. I didn't pay attention to his story since I was at last penning my own. I put my home studio back up, painted a rich shade of sage green on the walls, resumed taking on design customers, primarily women starting enterprises following a change in their lives. It's funny how many of them had the same appearance as myself at one point. Calm on the outside, yet subtly moving the pieces of their souls around. I began attending the Saturday farmers market. I took cooking lessons from my neighbor Helen, a retired professor of literature, who rarely followed instructions and always brought wine. After spending the summer in college, Caleb returned home, higher, more powerful. And he didn't inquire about Dad when he gave me a hug. He inquired about me. All I ever wanted was that I then returned to Lakewind by car one morning. Renovations have already started on the estate. The house was being transformed into a retreat facility for women who were starting over by the NGO. Ruth asked me to come visit, saying it was for continuation rather than closure. The lake glistened in the clear sky as I stood on the back porch. They had rebuilt the dock. The garden was already in full flower, albeit wild and untidy. A teenage volunteer handed me a little velvet pouch and said, "Someone left something for you, there's a note inside. You were more than simply the wife or the former partner. The compass I disregarded was you. This has always been and always will be yours. DC." The original key to the old garden shed was also found underneath the note. I took my time walking there. The scent of cedar dirt and remembrance hit first within. The old gardening implements I used to use were neatly placed. However, there was a pile of picture albums next to them. I got one open. There I was in a hammock with Caleb on my lap, giggling and tanned. Before his ambition hardened him, Drew built a fire. Walter is reading a book while grinning in a chair. Our life wasn't a deception. Simply put, it didn't go as we had hoped. I could live with that. I went for a final stroll by the lake before I departed. I rolled up my trousers, kicked off my shoes, and went into the chilly water. The pendant, made of marine glass, wobbled on my breast. I removed it and held it for a considerable amount of time. I then threw it gently into the water. Not with resentment, but because I had been sufficiently carried by it. Additionally, certain things are supposed to be released after they have been cured. That girl on the beach was no longer me. I also wasn't Mrs. Calder. Once more, I was Elena Ward. Complete soft-edged. Powerful conclusion. After we finished designing the storefront for her bakery 6 months later, I received a small box from one of my new clients. Lily, a modest, astute single mother. There is a pendant inside. Not green. It was rich amber in color, sea glass too. Time has also softened it. She remarked, "I thought you'd appreciate something shaped by survival." I said nothing at all, simply put it around my neck. Gently Drew was no longer the focus. Women who had been damaged, buried, or rendered invisible and yet resurfaced as something that people couldn't ignore were the focus of the discussion.